So good evening and welcome to Howard University. Welcome to the Bunch Center. I am Professor Josephine Dawuni, Assistant Professor of Political Science here at Howard University. And on behalf of the African Studies Department, the Center for African Studies, the Department of Political Science, and the Women and Gender Studies Collective, I welcome you all to the Bunch Center for a wonderful evening of discussion and conversations on women in African leadership with a focus on Tanzania. So without much ado, few ground rules. We're going to have the Honorable Ambassador, Her Excellency Mulamula, speak to us for about 30 minutes, and then my colleague Messia would respond. She's a discussant with Somi, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. And also, my students, remember, you're supposed to be tweeting, so get going once we start. So I would like to start off by introducing Ms. Nanelwa Tomi, who is a master's or graduate student at George Washington University, pursuing her master's in international education with a focus on decolonizing development in sub-Saharan Africa. Ms. Tomi, welcome to Howard University.
Thank you.
And next is my colleague, Assistant Professor Messia Clark at the African Studies Department, who will be discussing the ambassador's presentation after she's made her presentation. So welcome, Professor Clark. And I am honored to be able to stand here to introduce to you our special guest speaker for this evening, Her Excellency Ambassador Liberata Mulamula. She is a former ambassador of Tanzania to the United States and Mexico. She served as a diplomat for over 35 years, so she's a skilled diplomat. And she's currently the acting director of the Center for African Studies at George Washington University. Honorable Ambassador, Your Excellency Mulamula, welcome to Howard University, and we look forward to your engaging presentation. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I believe you can all see me, even from this side. And thank you to my dear sister Josephine for that gracious introduction. And as she rightly said, I've been a long time diplomat. And with diplomats, what we know best is to thank. And thank again. So allow me, first of all, to thank my sister, Dr. Messia Clark, Assistant Professor, my another sister, Josephine Dawuni, and also for gender balance, there's Robert here. I think there's Robert Mangila. In fact, the whole idea, I think, started with him. Because wherever, when you talk about gender, even I'm teaching about women and leadership in Africa, the majority of the students in my class are always, guess who? Girls or boys? They're always, the majority are the girls. But then I said this whole initiative started with Robert. So I did want to thank you. But I'm also very much honored and to be at Howard University. I was telling you that the last time I was here, I think it was about 3 years ago, and I don't know which part of Howard I was in. We had a conference on promotion of Kiswahili. So we came with our former president here. So that was my first time, but it was quite tough for me. It was very emotional to be in this university because I heard so much about it. We have most of our leaders who went through this university. So I feel privileged to be standing here, and I'm sure whoever is recording it will show I was at the Howard University, Half-Bunch International Affairs Center. So I feel very honored. But I also feel like, especially when I see the familiar faces around, I feel like I'm on the home ground. Home ground will be hearing more about Tanzania, because I come from Tanzania, but I consider myself as an African daughter. So I've been asked to speak about African Leadership and Gender. And as our moderator, Associate Professor Josephine said, they have given me 30 minutes. Very generous time. But knowing my students, and I know the students here won't be awake for 30 minutes I'm speaking. So I'll try to make it short. I will cut it short so that we can give time to the other, especially the panelists. In fact, I'm more anxious to hear about them than myself. So the subject, as you know, it generates a lot of interest, especially when you talk about, there are three issues here. There's the issue of gender, there's the issue of leadership, but also the context, Africa. So all these three combined was not easy to say, what do I speak about, especially in the few minutes I have. But I also found myself with a subject which I'm very passionate about. And as I mentioned, I teach about it, but I've also practiced it in my own way, the leadership, being in this form of gender. So I wanted to structure my remarks along, I think, three reflections. One, being also students, I want to take you through the path of contextual understanding of leadership. Because we always take it for granted that when you talk of leadership, people, everyone has their own interpretation, but always people think of political leadership. There are many forms of leadership at all levels. So we talk a bit about, especially the scholarly attempt to get us understand what is leadership. But then I will speak about the gender and leadership in Africa in general. I always say, for those who know Africa, with 54 countries, these are not the states of the United States, these are countries. So if I have to speak for the entire African countries, it might take us the whole of the fall semester, the spring semester, it will take us long to finish. So that's why I chose to speak about a country I know most. And then, of course, I'll be making reference to other countries. And then, at the end, maybe I will spice it up with my own experience as a leader, and as I said, as a daughter of Africa and Tanzania in particular. So let me also make it clear that I'm not intending to lecture. I just want us to have a conversation. From my presentation, I want also you to come up with maybe a different narrative, because my students have been attempting to change the narrative about leadership in Africa. So just to do justice to the professor around here, let me start by saying that it is important to note that leadership has been around for thousands of years, and yet scholars are still unable to contain it in a single definition they all agree on. One of the writers, she's I think a professor at the University of Richmond, Chiula Johane, she has an article on ethics, effectiveness, the nature of good leadership. She says leadership scholars concern themselves with the problem of defining leadership, and that some believe if they could agree on a common definition of leadership, they would be better able to understand it. But she argues that really this does not make sense, because scholars in history, biology, and other subjects not all agree on the definition of their subjects. And even if they did, it will not help them to understand it better. So another scholar called Rost, in his book on leadership for 21st century, listen to this. He says he collected 221 definitions of leadership, ranging from, because he had a time period from 1920s until 1990s, and that he found all the definitions of leadership say the same thing, but differently. So for him, leadership is about a person or persons somehow moving other people to do something. This is what I think I would feel a bit comfortable to use, because it's how I was telling my students, I said, you can't call yourself a leader if you have no followers. So to be a leader, you have to have followers, But then the title, Professor Joseph, the title, they call me ambassador, but does not make you a leader. It's what you do as a leader. So my students, they are not here, but one of them is here. Let me share with you this. They like referring, which I introduced to them, but every time they write their papers, they refer to the 5 C's of leadership. I gave a quiz the other day. I said, we started it at the beginning, and by the mid of the semester, they had forgotten. I said, okay, can one tell me the 5 C's of leadership? And then one said, oh, they are going through their notes. I've forgotten. But then when you mention one, then everybody goes with the rest of the C's. So if I may share that with you, and I think that describes, puts into context what leadership is all about. One C is competence. Competence, having knowledge. You can't be a leader when you don't have knowledge of what you are leading for. So that goes like without saying. But then we have seen leaders who are not as competent. But then another C is the courage. Courage, which can be translated into confidence, because that is the major thing of being a leader. You have to have the courage. Of course, there is also natural leadership, what they say if you are told you are in the family and you have to take care of your siblings. Nobody maybe asks you to do it, but you have to do it. But then we are talking about the public leadership, corporate leadership. So it requires confidence, and most important also, communication. One of the ambassadors, US ambassadors, was addressing our students last week, and he said the great leaders are also great communicators. The educators, they persuade without talking down to people. I was telling my students, I was saying, if you come out and you say, I want to be the president of the Students Association, and you are supposed, of course, to campaign, right? It doesn't just happen. Oh, it happens here, but at least in our universities, you had really to campaign. And then you are called upon, you are all seated here, I need your votes. And then, of course, the first thing, one has to introduce themselves, introduce the agenda. What is the agenda? But then I said, if you stand and then you are saying, you know, Liberata Mulamula, I am then everybody loses interest. I mean, you lose your votes just by that. So communication is quite important in terms of leadership. Of course, as you take over leadership, of course, there is the issues of consistency. To be predictable, people to know you. To know, say, oh, if we have this, I mean, even if it's our president, oh, but I think the US is also going to some issues regarding the predictability of leaders. Compassionate, and of course also to have, compassionate. It's very important. I mean, if you are leading some people, I mean, you have to be able to follow you. They need to feel motivated. They need to feel that you are sensitive to their needs. They need to feel that you're part of them. So compassionate is, I remember when we had President H.W. Bush, when he visited Tanzania, and everybody was saying, you can fault President Bush, but the man is compassionate. So at least he had that quality as a leader. So then, one also of my colleague at the GW said that there are 3 traits of successful leaders. Yeah, she added curiosity. Of course, we share the courage, but also said the heart, that you need to have a heart as a leader. But then, of course, because she could say she's a professor, she said, but while many US presidents have possessed 2 out of the 3 of those characteristics, no US president yet has had all the 3 in large quantities. The heart, the curiosity, and they said, of course, mostly the heart seems to be lacking most often. So I was just giving you this background because in my view, everybody is trying to understand, define leadership. It's not easy because Leadership is evolving. Leadership has to be contextualized. And when we talk of leadership, as I said, people think of the more political leaders. But then we have leaders at different levels. I was also telling my students, I said, you forget also we have religious leaders who get voluntary followers. Nobody asks you to go to church, but we all go, because we believe in the leadership of the church. So it is a complex, and I want you to continue studying about leadership. It's very important for all of you in your lives. So having said that, putting this into the context of Africa, where they say gender is the key in leadership in Africa. Of course, with all due respect to the men we have here, every time we talk of gender, people, they talk of women. It always, what sparks is, we're talking about women. Women, we are shortchanged. Women, we need leadership. Women. But I mean, gender, it is also another big field of study. It's about men and women. It's about race. It's about color. It's about opportunities. It's a lot of things. It's what defines us, our space, our places in the society or community. But then specifically for Africa, gender became an issue because of our cultures, our patriarchal societies with the male dominance, but also taking us through the history, the traditions, the colonial period that also transformed the roles of and genderized our societies in a different way. So that's why gender, when we speak of gender, especially in Africa, everybody always looks at the negatives of this gender relationship. But there are positives, especially in our traditions, that our roles were very clear. I mean, for many who are from Africa, they know very well that there was nobody who came to say this is, we have activists here about what women should be doing. Everybody knew what she was doing. It is my great-great-grandmothers, my grandmothers, they knew, and nobody fought like they were being harassed or sexual, I don't know what, harassment. No. My mother knew that she was supposed to do this, ABC, and my father knew what to do. So it was a very good, peaceful coexistence. But now, as I said, with time, things have evolved. Then there have been international conferences about the gender, which has helped in a way, at least, to be able all to have standards. And when we talk about women, for example, women empowerment, then we have something to measure about the women empowerment. So this has advised most of the policies, programs in Africa, in our countries, depending on which country you're talking about. So I must say, of course, Africa, they came up with what they call Agenda 2063. I want you to dig it out. And this is about aspiration of the Africa we want. Because I don't want to go into the history, I want to go into the future. Because that's where we all want you to be, then be focused. So among these aspirations of the Africa we want, in 50 years, because this was declared after 50 years, now for the next 50 years, this is the Africa we want. One, and this is aspiration number 6, that we see Africa that is as it's people-centered, gender equal, and where women are empowered to play their rightful role in all spheres of life. So, fortunately, this aspiration has also found its way in the United Nations framework of Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 5, if you Google, find 5.5 of the Sustainable Development Goals, well known as SDGs, affirms the importance of women equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. And then you have Dr. Josephine. She came to speak to my class. We just realized there are so many legal instruments, international regional, continental, that really embodies all these issues of gender and leadership in Africa. So there is all what we need. But why do we find wanting and still speaking about it? This is the question. This is the question. In Africa, of course, as my former president, the late Mwalimu Julius Nyerere used to say, he said, if numbers were horses, we would be riding very high. Because Africa has been number one in this. We have had the first African woman president. We have had so the first, and we are leading in terms of the members of parliament, women parliaments, gender parities, you know what? But then, and also the African Union Commission, those who know the African Union Commission based in Addis Ababa, it's the only continental organization on earth that has achieved parity, gender parity, in its executive leadership. It has 50-50. At the level of these decision makers, commissioners, they are 50-50. So as I said, we are very good. But then, I was at this conference of the African Women Leaders Forum, because what has defined Africa in terms of leadership, especially with the women, because we had former president of Malawi, Joyce Banda, she's no more in leadership. We had President Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, she's also passing on the baton, and it's not passing it to any woman. I think it's a soccer player or something. So the women, the least they could do was to march and say, please, whoever takes up leadership, we need our peace. We need our peace that was guaranteed by this woman. So almost all of them, we don't have anymore president. But then we have at least in Tanzania, the first vice president. She's still, and in Mauritius, of course, we have a president. But then as Betty, there's one lady who wrote, she's called Betty Modi Idrisu, in an article about 10 things about African women leadership. She says, it is difficult for an African woman to climb the road, it's a difficult road to climb, and it's even more difficult to stay at the top once you arrive. So you can see all falling. So this is about Africa. I just wanted to give you this contextual analysis about how we are faring. I said in numbers we are faring very well, but then whether we can sustain this and whether it means that is gender equality in terms of leadership. So now turning to the country I know very well, Tanzania. Does anybody know where Tanzania is? About the students? Only one? Please, we can do better. Okay, I will leave that to your professors. But then, as I said, of course, Africa is so big. Africa is so big, but then we are defined by our territories. You know, there's one of the scholars, he wrote about Africa. This was Frantz Fanon. You see this Africa map. First of all, he defined it as shaped like a pistol. You see it as a pistol? And then he was trying to find where the trigger of that, because he was writing the context of the crisis we had in Congo and in the Horn of Africa, so that's what he said. But then I want to show you, Tanzania is right here, it's somewhere here. You see on this map, it's on the eastern coast, and it's one of the biggest country. It's like 6 countries of East Africa, put them together, and you get one Tanzania. It's not as big as, not big as the US, but we are big. And we have 8 countries that neighbor Tanzania. So I like to talk about Tanzania because there's always good stories. Good stories to talk about Tanzania. I am the product of the of the good maybe policies, programs of what our founding fathers, founding president. You can also Google Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. If you can remember Mwalimu means a teacher. Was our first president, but we all knew him as Mwalimu Nyerere. So when he took over the reins of the British at independence, he inherited a country that had only less than 2% of the population, of the total population. By then, I think it was about 20 million people. Only 2% had gone to school. He had only 12 professionals. That includes the engineers. Among the 12, the engineers, the doctors. So I think maximum 12, no more. And the country is so big, about 936,000 square kilometers, but had only, I think, only 300 paved road, kilometers of paved road. So you see what the country of the British did to us. So then when he did what he did, he said, I'm going to fight a war against 3 enemies. Anybody has a guess about those 3 enemies? One, I heard somebody say something. What are the, Robert, you know the enemies? One was poverty. 2 was disease. 3, and most important and relevant to you, was ignorance, illiteracy. And he invested all he could get through his friends, invested in these 3 major sectors. So Tanzanians, through that social program, of course the Americans abandoned him, said he has turned to be communist. And he was saying, for Africa, any African, as far there's no Africa with any African who is communist. We are communalities. Based on communalities. So he started the so-called social program, Ujamaa, familyhood, that every citizen, Tanzanian citizen, had the right to go to school, had the right for medical, had the right to overcome poverty. And then everything that happened after the 60s, that's when we had independence, only 53 years, revolved around those commitments. So even our constitution, I think is one of the constitutions that has the Bill of Rights. I mean, of course, not in the Americans maybe Bill of Rights, but you had like an amendment. We had it only the Bill of Rights encouraged in the Constitution, gender equality, race equality, equality, egalitarian society. I'm giving you this framework to say that whoever Tanzania you see today, if they have to be honest, nobody was denied school. It is primary school. We had the universal primary school. Nobody would die because cannot afford medical. So I'm saying this because I'm the product of that. My father was one of the civil servants, but he was not rich. But we were guaranteed. I went to the public school, from standard 1 to the university, and we never paid a single cent. When you reached the university, you had only to sign what they call BASA, commitment that when you graduate, you'll work for the government 5 years, minimum of 5 years. Who would not sign to that? So it was not a loan as such. Yeah, so here we are. To give you this background. So through the leadership, because Mwalimu was almost like there forever, for 30 years, and everybody was getting impatient. But then he also could see that the signs of the war, that the signs have changed, so he stepped down. But the good thing is that all the leaders that came after him, they have continued with that egalitarian kind of society, of course, with the challenge of now. And let me also, when President Obama visited Tanzania in 2013, this was 30th July 2013, I was fortunate to be there to be among those who are receiving him. I was coordinating his visit. And then what he was struck with on arrival, he could see on the receiving line, those who were dancing, those everyone, it's women, it's men. It's women together like in equal numbers. Then what he said, I quoted this, I remember it very now. And he said, he was quoting his mother. He said, you can measure how well the country does by the way it treats its women. He was very fascinated. So that's why I'm saying, I like to talk about Tanzania and I can continue and continue. So with the new government, of course we have a new government. I'm sorry people, they call our president a bulldozer. Whatever connotation, whatever that means, I'm not the one to talk about it. But then, today I'm told he has also been appointing more women in very senior positions. So, but the whole policy of Tanzania is to maintain the social cohesiveness as a nation, and based on the principles that have made Tanzania to be known as heaven of peace. It has made Tanzania to be like an island with so many, we have the neighbors that are not very peaceful, but we have played a role to help to get also our neighbors to be as peaceful, because you can't say I'm peaceful while your next door neighbor house is burning. So I'm saying this because that's when I came in. My career path was defined by this philosophy that Tanzania cannot be peaceful if the neighbors are burning. So from early stage of my career when I joined the Foreign Service, I participated in almost all peace negotiations. Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, Central African Republic have been there conditioned to find ways of making people to live peacefully. I'm saying this, I was given that responsibility. If you go through my profile, I was given the responsibility to head one of the first regional intergovernmental organization for peace and stability in the Great Lakes region. This Great Lakes region is not about Michigan, no, it is about these lakes that have been in turmoil. Countries not bordering those lakes but have been in turmoil. So as a woman, I was appointed at a conference at the summit of the heads of state, the presidents in Nairobi in 2006. I never expected it. I was coordinating for my country. And then they were saying, my president sends me a note. He says, Liberata, I'm sorry, I have to let you go because everybody wants you to head this new organization. I say, oh, good Lord, because I knew what it meant. But then with our leaders, they don't give you a choice to say no. No, that is like an order. It's like you are in the military, so you follow orders. I didn't know where to start. And to make it worse, because I thought if they establish that organization, it will be in Arusha, Tanzania. Then it will be easy. But they said, we have decided it goes to Burundi. Burundi, that was the serious war, was struggling with the rebel groups. And then they say what? That will be your first test case. And you talk of women putting the bar very high for us. They put it very high. And I was given 5 months because they signed this pact, treaty, on December 15th, 2006. And they wanted it up and running, that they will have the follow-up summit in June 2007. And they are coming to Bujumbura. So as they say, if you want things well said, give it to him. But if you want things well done, give it to Josephine. So this, I had to take up that mantle. It was not an easy thing, but then I was saying, I told them what my acceptance speech, I had to give acceptance speech. I said, failure is not my choice. We'll do it. I'll do it. And of course, it's not just me, because I had a team. I had very sympathetic, we don't call them donors anymore, development partners, the Germans, the Canadians, they all came to my aid. And then we had one president from Zambia. Mwanawasa is late now. After the fanfare, he was saying, but how do you expect this young lady to start up? You didn't give her, we didn't approve any budget. Where's she going to get the money? Oh, they said, oh, she'll find a way. And then I was saying this was quite a benevolent leader. Mwanawasa said, he called me, he says, you know what, young lady, I will send you the first check. I will send you the first check. I thought he was joking. And then I get to Bujumbura, somebody knocking at the door, somebody from Zambia has come to hand deliver the check of $500,000 US. Yes, this is not a rich country. But he said, I know these people have put you to test for you to fail. So he gave me, I said, those are the leaders. So when you say about leadership, this I'm telling you going through that you never even go to any school. You are lucky that at least you get to study about leadership. I never studied about leadership. Yeah. But then it evolves. And the passion, you have to have passion in what you do. And finally, before Josephine calls me to order, I give credit and all due respect to my father. My father, my late father, now is of course late, he told us one thing. He says, in life, what would propel you is nothing else but hard work, perseverance, determination, good conduct. And he put it, he said, maybe you may forget this. I'm giving you 3 Ds. 3 Ds. Use them throughout your life. And this is what? Any guess? Determination, great. Another D? Extra credit. You're getting anybody wants credit, extra credit to determination. Another D, yes? Dedication, great. Another one, last one, 3 Ds. Another one, you don't want the credit? Okay, I'll give credit to myself. Discipline. Yes, she said it? Oh, the baby. So these 3 Ds are very important in whether you are a leader, because I've seen leaders, like, I'm not mentioning names here, but then there's no discipline. Have discipline. But finally, he also taught us that leading, you have to lead by being yourself. Leading by being yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. So when you talk of gender, we want to work hand in hand with the men. I'm not trying to be a man here. I'm not trying to be him. But I'm trying to show that I have the qualities like him, and that we can all both be leaders. But also, they say, use, as a woman, utilize your natural instincts. You know, women, we have those natural instincts, especially those who are mothers. Why don't we use that skills? So, Josephine, let me end here, but let me remind this is a woman activist. She also came to speak to my class. She was saying, being normal is just a setting on the dryer. But strive to be extraordinary. And she also said, if it is a meal, you should always ask to be at the table and discuss about the menu, not being the menu. Be at the table to discuss about the menu. That's what leadership is all about. When you want decision making, you don't want them already prepared the menu. You want to be at the table and be part of preparing that menu and you're pro-eating. And finally, of course, I said when I was ambassador in service, my title was Ambassador Plenipotentiary and Extraordinary. So as I said, title is not really, but this word was a big title. But then I want to end on a note that with that title, I always strive to be extraordinary. And Yvonne Chaka Chaka, you remember the singer, she said on that ending note, and I always love this, she said when she was describing women, you know what she said? She says, women means well-organized men. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Plenipotentiary Ordinary, if I could say it all, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for taking us through history and bringing us to the current, and most especially for sharing your personal experiences. And my students, I realize I'm the only one tweeting, even though I'm not good at tweeting. Taylor, I've seen your tweet, the rest I haven't, so let's get going. Yeah, I'm grading your tweets, if you've gotten. Yeah, so I'll now open up the floor for our discussants to give us their remarks, and I'll start with my colleague, Professor Misia Clark.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you to the ambassador for that wonderful presentation. Like she said, Robert was the one who came up with the idea of doing this. And for myself, it was an exciting opportunity because meeting both the ambassador and Inelwa, finding two Tanzanian women who were in the social sciences, who were in DC, who were also organizers and people who ideologically I really kind of felt in tune with, it's very rare. And so I was really excited, and then, you know, the panel just kind of came together, and so I'm really excited. But I wanted to kind of also put in context some of the remarks that the ambassador made. So she talked about her own upbringing, especially under Mwalimu Nyerere. But I also wanted to talk a bit about kind of women in Tanzania. And not only is she a product of what the legacy of Mwalimu Nyerere, but also the legacy of Tanzanian women. And so, you know, I kind of like to describe Tanzanian women as kind of like a quiet storm. Like you really don't hear them coming, but they're really busy getting work done. And so during colonialism, you had various women kind of mobilizing. So you had, for example, in the 1940s, the Pare Women's Uprising in northern Tanzania. Then during our independence movement, you had women like Bibi Titi Mohammed, who was side by side with Mwalimu Nyerere, organizing women, getting women's husbands to agree to allow them to mobilize. To allow them to kind of participate. And so she was really instrumental in that. And so as we know with many African countries, the women who were part of the liberation struggles, their names are often forgotten. But Bibi Titi Mohammed was one of them. Then later, you had women organizing and creating organizations like TGNP, the Tanzania Gender Networking Program, which was started in the 1990s, which is still remains strong. And they're a really positive organization that works on kind of achieving gender equality through policy advocacy and mainstreaming. And so not only does TGNP work with Tanzanian women on the ground, but also women's groups across the continent. So you really have a lot of kind of connections between women's groups in Ghana and Kenya and other places. But they also have implemented what they call transformative feminist organizing. And using the theory of transformative feminism, which challenges patriarchy and challenges neoliberalism while recognizing class and gender inequality. But it also kind of seeks to take the academic and merge it with the organizer on the ground. And oftentimes you see these two bodies acting separately. And so one of the things I've loved about, women in Tanzania is that the academics have not kind of stood in their little, academic silos and talked about feminism, but many of them have been on the ground, have been leaders, have been working with women of various backgrounds. And then, of course, in terms of leadership, we had the first African woman to be the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations was a Tanzanian woman, Asheros Migiro. So you have kind of this legacy of Tanzanian women in leadership roles, fighting in terms of policy, working with the government, but also challenging the government and holding the government up to its promises of gender equality. So I wanted to kind of put that in context, because I know the ambassador talked quite a bit about some of the early policies of Tanzania and how that affected gender. And I know that what Mwalimu Nyerere did for women in Tanzania in terms of his gender progressive policies, because I know at one point Mwalimu said that, mentioned the idea of women's work in the home and that women don't get paid for women's work, and so it's therefore then, because they're not getting paid for it, not seen as valuable as the work men do outside of the homes. And he thought that that was a problem. So for the 1960s, 1970s, that's very progressive during that time. I mean, it's even kind of progressive now. So I wanted to kind of put all of that in context, and I wanted to, definitely thank the ambassador. As a Tanzanian, it's definitely really great to see, women who are paving the way, who have paved the way, and she's a really great role model. And I'm glad that I got a chance to meet her literally this past year. So I'm definitely glad. I'm glad she was able to come. And so I'm going to pass it over to Lenoa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Are you guys still awake? I see some of you guys dozing, so wake up, because it's not over yet. My name is Nanelwa, and I'm so thrilled to be here this afternoon and to be sharing the space, the stage with Dr. Clark and Ambassador Mulamula. As Dr. Clark mentioned, it's such a rarity to be in a space with Tanzanian women, to have a space to speak amongst one another, irrespective of socioeconomic status, age, and all of the different kind of hierarchies that typically exist. We just really get to exchange and learn from one another, and it's just really a privilege because this really never happens. So I'm just really, really honored, first and foremost, to be here. Next, I want to also express my gratitude to Dr. Webangira and Dr. Clark again for organizing this panel. And then also want to just shout out to my friends who are here to support. Yep, had to make the plug. Who are here supporting from near and far. It really is just such an honor to see you all in the audience and to have your support here. And then I also just want to honor women who, in my family, who've played an important role in my life, even though they're not here. My sister, my mom, my bibis, which bibi means grandmother in Kiswahili, as well as the woman I was named after, who was my great aunt, another Nanelwa, the only Nanelwa I know. So I am going to, I think, contextualize this using my personal experience and my journey to hopefully intertwine with what both Ambassador Mulamula and Dr. Clark have shared. So the first time I realized that I was a girl was when I was at my aunt's house playing with my boy cousins, and we were like tickling each other, and I was really winning this game. And then all of a sudden my aunt was like, "Nana, you need to stop. Boys are not supposed to be tickled." And I was like, huh? Like, do boys not laugh? Like, that's so weird. So I just really thought about that. I was surprised, and it was just such a strange moment. So I should preface this by saying that I come from a very non-traditional Tanzanian household. When my parents first emigrated to the United States, they created this strategic plan that always allowed one of them to be in the house. So one person would be working, but then someone always had to be home to reinforce child rearing. So my dad, I saw him cooking and cleaning and dancing and doing all the things that my mom would do. My mom was also a superwoman, and upon arriving to the US, which was about 2 years later than my dad, she had to acclimate to the United States, which is really foreign for her. She had to learn the rules, the language, and had very little familiarity because there wasn't much community or family that was around. And one thing my dad always reinforced to both my sister and I was that we were always extraordinary, and particularly in response to boys or in relationship to boys. He was always like, you can do this even better than a boy can do it. And I think he felt this urge to always emphasize that coming from Tanzania, having predominantly women as siblings, and kind of seeing the ways in which women were forced to act or interact with their communities. So in observing this kind of intentionality between how my parents interacted and reacted to one another, I came to understand gender and leadership in a very unique way. A leadership that wasn't just hung up on power, but recognized that compromise, patience, and understanding had to be at the core of that. Which brings me to the power of names and naming, which I think is such an integral part of the Black diaspora, that experience. My name was supposed to be Andrew because when my mother complained of having this intense belly pain to my father on the phone, he insisted that that has to be my son. You know, he's practicing his soccer in the womb, like it has to be my son. But alas, here I am, a female, Nanoa. My parents embraced, loved, and taught me and my siblings to love ourselves at a very early age. Before the craze of American Idol, I remember my dad, he's like the ultimate entertainer. So he used to, as like, I guess this is when my mom wasn't there, he would coordinate us in the basement in these singing competitions where choreography, song choice, just performance was judged in front of my parents. And so my siblings and I, we each had to come up with like a song, what the dance was gonna be, like the whole routine. It sounds outlandish, it kind of was when I think about it, but it really like helped reinforce this confidence in us and really helped us to create kind of our sense of self in that space. And that's how I think I became more confident in owning the space that I occupy and also being really open to improvising wherever I needed to, which I think are really important characteristics inherently found in women and leaders. There are also the names that we don't choose, but which are imposed upon us. Names that we cringe to hear ourselves referred to, but somehow find ourselves responding. During my first trip to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, I was in awe of how pervasive gender was in every scenario. The name Binti, which is Kiswahili for daughter, seemed to always prefix my name or just replace it entirely. I would also often encounter in multiple spaces this name, whether in the grocery store or in the classroom, and while it was often used as a term of endearment for many, it also expressed a condescending attitude that made me feel inadequate. It is through this initial experience in Tanzania that I began to really reflect on how I wear my femininity and how these binary delineations of gender have not only come to be, but are accepted. When I returned to Tanzania a few years later and was again forced to come to terms with the concept of Binti, I rejected it and reminded those attempting to name me that I was now a mwanamke, which means woman in Kiswahili. Many of the people I shared that sentiment with laughed, like you all did, and this just kind of made me think about how we as Tanzanian women who lead in multiple formal and non-formal ways claim agency over our womanhood. Does it have to look a certain way in order to be considered feminine? Does it have to follow certain steps or speak Kiswahili fluently in order to be embraced as authentic? Does it always need male affirmation, or can it just stand alone boldly as is? When I was in high school, I was over-involved and just did the most. I played a lot of sports, I was in all the student organizations, etc. I really thrived in being active, present, and at the forefront. And I think I really stepped into my leadership at that moment. But what I didn't realize was that even though my parents were supportive and encouraging of my roles in these spaces, they were also still grappling with what a Tanzanian binti does. Let me preface this by saying that in both middle and high school, I had many phases, but the most prominent was my tomboy phase. I would spend my paychecks, the very little I had, on Sean John and Coogee and like all these name brands because I was trying to emulate this like black cool that I saw in and around me, like on 106 in Park or MTV, just like these experiences that I wanted to recreate in my space. So I'd always find a way to kind of leave what I deemed as feminine spaces. Whenever my mom would try to teach my sister and I how to cook chapati or sambusa, which are these traditional dishes that we eat in Tanzania, I would always just find a way to leave because I was not about that. Like I was trying to figure out what P. Diddy was doing, what that person was doing, like I was just not about it. So I think this all kind of came to a halt for me after an incident that I had with my mom, when she said, Nanella, why can't you be more girlish like Caitlin? And Caitlin was one of my childhood white female friends growing up. And it just like really threw me for a loop because I was like, whoa, what does that mean? Like girlish? I thought that I was girlish enough. So this struck me as the reminder that these ingrained perceptions of gender were still a part of my mother's way of knowing, despite being abroad, and that our family's lifestyle was a choice, but not fully embraced as her norm. So again, I ask, how do we as Tanzanian women reconstruct the way we imagine the binti or the mwanamke? How do we lead our own narrative? I've begun this work somewhat internally through studies and research at GW, through this decolonizing the mind framework, which I think is really, really critical and important. And although it can be really challenging and emotionally draining, I think it's been important in deconstructing and re-envisioning these boundaries that currently exist. Thank you.
So once again, thank you very much to our discussants, Dr. Clark and Ms. Tommy. Wonderful response and remarks to the ambassador's presentation. So before I open up for questions and comments, I would like to once again remind you, please tweet. And I don't know if you have that. I'm still new at this, so let's learn together. So it's supposed to be, the hashtag is, correct me if I'm wrong, Howard Women GS, right? Howard Women Gender Studies. And the Twitter handle is at Howard, right? Are we doing this right? At HU Gender Studies, right? Did I get it right? Fatu?
The hashtag in the email.
Was it wrong? Okay. What did I give you in the email?
Hashtag agenda SD.
Okay. You say, and just, I'll find a way to connect, I think, right? Can I? Okay, so let's do this once again. So the hashtag, which you can use now, if I'm not able to retrieve the other ones you've been doing, or what I have been using is, so hashtag Howard Gender GS, right? Howard Gender, okay, this is wrong. Let me get this once again. Howard Women GS, okay? So Howard Women GS. Okay, and I'm gonna let you guys give me a lesson on tweeting in the classroom on Wednesday. All right, so I'm gonna open up for questions now, and please raise your hand and ask a question. Let's try and make the questions short, and whoever feels obliged to respond can respond. So opening up for questions now. Maya.
I wanted to know from the ambassador, when you talk about like women in political leadership roles, how is that organized? Like, are women on the ground organizing to get out there and vote together, or are men in support of this? They want to see more women in leadership, or is it more women than men that live in that particular area? Like, how does that come about? How are you organizing to do that?
Okay, I can speak.
Yes, please, yes.
Yeah, thank you. There are two aspects. One about women in political leadership. Let me say that it was made possible by the, I don't know whether you are familiar about the quota systems, like affirmative action, not really exactly, but
Go ahead.
that it was agreed by, of course, at the continental level, at the African Union level, but also at the country level, that each country has to set aside a number of seats for women in parliament, in government, And this came out in the African Union declarations, if you remember the Beijing declaration. So every country has been trying to achieve that percentage as a minimum. So most of the countries you hear have women in parliament, women in political positions. That has helped, beginning in 1990s. That is one aspect. Like we have in Rwanda, they are reading, I think they have 64%, but then they started with the minimum of 30. In Tanzania also, we started with the minimum of 30. Now it's growing, must be now maybe 35, going to 50. So that has enabled women to to step into those high political positions and in the parliament. But then, the issue of mobilizing women, because most of the voters, if you have been watching when there is an election in Africa, the majority who are lining up, some with even children on their backs, they are always women. But then the issue is always, why don't they vote for the women fellows? They go there and they vote for men. But then, on the awakening, and the living example was in Liberia. I mentioned that Liberia was the first country that produced the first African president. It didn't just happen because she tried the first time, she didn't win it. The second time, because of the women, mobilization of the women, you know, most of the women in Africa are in markets, so they were all mobilized to vote for her the second time. And that's how she got elected. But this is not the same you see in many of the African countries. You know, in Tanzania, of course, they are all enlightened, but they never mobilize themselves. They mobilize themselves to ensure that at least those 30% seats, they get them. They get to be filled. Because sometimes the political parties will say, we don't find any qualified women for this. So they are given 30% of the seats, but then they fill only 15. So then that's when you have women within those parties working so hard to be able to get the women to be elected. I was here when the women marched throughout Washington, Boston, all capitals. For me, I could, of course, my colleagues asked me if I could join, and I said, but I find this is, why are they doing it now? They should have done it earlier, before the election, if at all they want. I said, this is something a little too late. And then I said, what is this taking them? I have not heard anything after that. So that's why I'm saying there are two aspects to it, but if we could get the women to mobilize themselves to vote, because all the statistics in Africa, I don't know in these countries, women are the majority, whether in terms of voters, whether in terms of population census. And now, the good thing is we have this they call the youth bulge. So if you can get the youth, and especially the girls, to be able, those who can vote, to vote, then you might find a different channel. So I say there are two aspects to this, but yet the women are yet to really get mobilized and put their acts together and get the women elected.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ambassador, and for the discussants. I found all of the comments really very interesting and enlightening. I wanted to ask the Ambassador perhaps to, in some ways, respond to Nanela's comments in terms of one of the comments that I heard the Ambassador saying was that I guess historically, if we can say that, or certainly your parents and your grandparents' age, gender roles were defined. You said your mother knew what she was supposed to do, and your father knew what he was, supposed to do. And then we have Nanela, a young, Tanzanian, who is saying, I'm bucking all of that, and I'm not really interested in learning how to cook, for my husband, and kind of play those roles. So I wonder how you would respond to Nanela in that context. But then likewise, Nanela, how you would respond to, one of the challenges that we as African feminists have had and continue to have, right, well, certainly we have, we provide a critique or are certainly interested in critiquing a kind of a Western frame of feminism. So it does not necessarily need to look like, and it certainly on the African continent will not look like it looks here in the United States, right? So Nanelwa, for you as well, I mean, how do you grapple with, right, finding your feminist identity, but not, but also claiming your African feminist identity, right? And what are the kind of pillars that are most important in terms of framing that conversation and that really kind of, I guess, journey for you as well?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure Nanelwa will have to speak better for herself how she's grappling with this. But I'm very thankful to your questions, because those are the issues. And that's why at the beginning, when I was talking about the leadership, I said you have to define it in terms of time. Times have changed. So I cannot be telling Nanelwa, no, this is not right. This is not what your mother did. Things have changed. And we just realized also that though the gender roles were defined, but then in the final analysis, we find that they were very suppressing women. Because, they could not go to school because of, no, you have to be at home and do the household. But then when things changed, and when we had a so-called cash economy, that you need to earn money, because in the past they didn't have cash. They were just barter trade. So you grow your crops, you exchange with one day. That's how they survived. They didn't even need money. But when money came into play, that's where you had men going to those either plantations, getting to earn that money. And it became so sweet that they didn't want even the women to earn it, but just wait and be given whatever pennies they were given. But again, as I said, the times have changed. There's no way you can have the Nenelwas and then tell them you can stay at home and cook, or even Dr. Msia. It's not. So that's why we have to adjust. Talk of feminism. I'm happy that you have shown that what you see in Western world as feminism is not the same as because ours is quite a mix of many things. But also we're trying to, that is, whoever those feminist activists, to understand that there are certain values, there are certain traditions that are still need to be upheld. They are very important in defining who you are, because with time we are losing our identities. So if being a feminist is just trying to, be against the man, that's not feminism. That's not feminism. But the others have taken it to another level. Yeah. So this is especially me, when I talk to them, I said, maybe you don't see me as qualifying as a feminist, definition, but I am. I am, because I care about how the relationship, we have to build the bridges between ourselves and men. We have to build these relations, because I'm saying diplomacy is about building relations, good relations. So this is, for me, I like feminism, but that fits in our own values and traditions.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Before I,
No worries.
so excited to say hi. Please, Tommy, please respond.
That one? Double whammy. Okay.
Fox News.
Right, Fox News. Thank you for your question. That's a great question. I think, so I was just writing some notes and thinking about the journey, and I think it's important to note, one, that I'm not anti the cooking. I just think that it's important for both parties to play a role in that, and it was such an instrumental part of my upbringing to see my dad also in the kitchen cooking alongside my mom, not just sitting there, or vice versa. Like, my mom wasn't just sitting there either. Like, it was like a joint experience. And I think because food is such an integral part of the Black diasporan experience, it's important. And I think at the time in high school, I was like, I don't want to do this, because I was coming into my identity, and I felt like part of what I think traditionally my parents saw as being traditionally like binti in Tanzania and female, I just wasn't about, because I was also like trying to figure out my place, like as a brown person in the United States who like didn't really fit into either box, So I think it's a journey. And I think even now, after going to Tanzania a couple of times now and creating my own space in Tanzania, like it's no longer like my parents' Tanzania, it's my own. I think I have come to embrace these activities or traditions of cooking and cleaning and all these different things in such a more positive way, because it's like, oh, I want to learn how to cook this so that I can carry on a certain tradition from my own family, or carry on this legacy in and of itself. So it no longer feels like something that's being imposed on me, but something that I have a choice on and over. So it's kind of different now. But I think it's a journey, and I think it's hard as a bicultural person for it to be defined either way. Yeah.
Dr. Clark.
I just wanted to say there's a couple chairs. I know that
Yes.
some folks, so there's 1, 2, 3 chairs. So I know folks were. So there's one over there.
All right, the gentleman in the back, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador and the panelists, for the presentation. My question is towards the Ambassador. I'm not from Tanzania, I'm from Gambia, but I did, I'm really, I got a chance to read a lot about you, because I really like how he laid the foundation for Tanzania when the country became independent. I just with regards to looking at the broader African continent, when it comes in terms of adopting a model when it comes to development. Now, he started the egalitarian, he implemented the egalitarian policies that you see you are a product of. When it comes to development, like in terms of adopting, whether do we look to the East, China, or the West, when it comes to development, where do you think that model fits now, or going forward for the continent of Africa? Like, where are we? Because sometimes I think when some of the leaders of countries are trying to decide on what development model to carry on with, I think you have the Western type, or now the Chinese are also trying to have a big footprint in terms of having Chinese. So Africa going forward to tackle this poverty that he waged on. What model do you think the continent or a lot of these countries can look into?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether we go for models. Of course, Tanzania is, from the very beginning, they had a very interesting policy. I don't know, you are very young, maybe you never heard about this. The non-aligned policy, that you are not aligned to the West or to the East. This became like a policy during the height of the Cold War, because we are forced, either you go by with the US or with the Soviet Union. So Tanzania decided to be neutral. So it is the same policy that applies now, because we know if you're from the Chinese, what we need from the Chinese. We go to the West when we know what we need from the West. So it's just borrowing experiences from all sides, because I don't think there's anybody who can now even define, even to tell China that I don't think you can. China also can say they are communist, although they have a communist party. I mean, they are applying. Maybe they are communist, but they are applying capitalist system. Yes, of competition, markets, and cash economy. We talk of the cash economy all the time. So it is not either or. It is seeing what is suitable for you. And in terms of development, I said, of course, Tanzania is still among the poorest. And the Mwalimu's model was good then, because as a young country, it needed to have policies that would unify a country as a nation. But then, as I said, in the 80s, he just found this is not working, because to be able to sustain those programs, it depended so much on foreign aid. Almost 90%, 100% was on foreign aid. But then when you would anger, for example, one of those countries that were wrong, and then they withdraw the foreign aid, then all your programs would just crumble. So that is why he decided, let's open it up. Let's have investments, foreign direct investments from either East, West, or South. Let's have it as a way to go. And that is the way to go for Africa. it's investment, it is trade, it's industrialization. But then what we need to be able to adapt to is that we don't have to go every time to the West. We have our own resources, like Tanzania is so rich in natural resources. If you can be able to exploit those resources, of course we need technology, we need capital. But then if that is not a policy, then of course we'll always be beggars. Because every African country is endowed by its resources. So if they can be used well, be exploited for the development of the people of the country, I think Tanzania and the African countries will be able to leapfrog, like we are leapfrogging in mobile technology. So I'm sure we are on the right path if we have the right leadership. Because everything boils down. You are from Gambia. I was meeting today one of Gambian, he came to see me. He was a former magistrate or attorney general in Gambia, but he had to flee because of the administration, the home administration. So he lived in Tanzania, actually. Worked at the tribunal in Tanzania in Arusha. So he came to see me. Of course, he was interested to hear about African studies. But then what he was telling me is now with the African Development Bank. He said, you know, when I sit at the African Development Bank and I look at Africa, every country in Africa can be able to stand on its own. But it's because we have wrong leadership. So if you can sort out the leadership part and then be able to get the necessary technology and capital and what, we'll be rising.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go this way and then come back this way. The lady over here.
Yes, my name is Lucia. Thank you all for your wonderful discussion. I just have a very short, sweet question. How have you tapped into mentorship opportunities in your respective professional and academic spheres? And in seeking mentors, do you exclusively go after just female mentors, or do you look for whoever's best qualified?
Oh, good. That's yours.
I guess the this one? Come down here. For me, I think if you only seek out female mentors, then you're going to miss out on some really good mentoring opportunities. So for me, it's, you know, whoever's qualified, whoever I've felt inspired by. And it's often, you know, whether it's a colleague, a former professor, or somebody like now, you know, having met the ambassador just recently, I'm definitely going to be, I've already told her I'm coming to her office to visit. So, you know, when you find someone, it's hard to find good mentors. So when you find someone, it's, you know, kind of just putting yourself in a position where you can learn from them and you can get advice from them. And then, of course, paying it forward, where if you have an opportunity to mentor someone else, formally or informally, then kind of you having, as you want mentors, you then have to take on the responsibility of mentoring others. So I think it's kind of being in that cycle of receiving mentorship, but also giving mentorship.
Are we all supposed to respond? Or just
For any of you.
Okay, I think you stated a lot and pretty well done there. I think one thing I would add is just that it's important to just be open to the mentors who will come your way. I think in my life, I have never been as like pointed to say like, oh, I want you as my mentor, and like you're gonna get me through college or whatever the experience is. I think that it's been opportunities where I've met individuals who I've been really struck by, and like it just kind of organically evolved into a mentorship mentee experience. And I think just like Dr. Clark said, you end up paying that forward in different ways, whether it is formally or informally in the work that you do. Did you want to?
No, I can only say, I mean, I support what they say, but I always caution whoever seeks mentorship. I was saying, if there's somebody wants to impose himself as a mentor, be careful. Somebody who volunteers quickly to be the mentor.
I had a hand here. Yes.
I had a question. So earlier we talked about this idea of contextualizing feminism and that might look different on the continent and even within the specific countries and maybe even further within the regions. And I'm wondering what you guys see your role as, having had the experiences that you've had in pushing forward that, to the extent that you believe that there is like an agenda that needs to be pushed forward in advancing women leadership, what you see your role as, keep it in mind and being sensitive to like contextualism. And then the second question was, the ambassador mentioned having women in these leadership positions, and that after a while then they fall out and we don't have any more. So what do you see as a way to counter that?
Okay, as far as I think the feminist aspect, so variance and kind of perspectives within African feminism, and I know for myself, kind of also the whole mentoring thing, my younger sister, when she finished university, she finished her undergraduate in Hampton, her master's in England, and went straight back to Tanzania. She was like, I'm not doing the West and I'm going back home. And so she joined TGMP, and now she's kind of working with grassroots organizing. In her generation, she's about 25. I find that I have to learn from them because I'm a bit more conservative. So she's back in Tanzania, and she's doing things like working on, kind of with sex workers, and kind of the stigma of that, and the idea that we punish the men and not the women. Punish the women and not the men. But she's also working with this idea that, if organizations like TGMP are fighting violence against women, then corrective rape should also be part of that. And so just even that whole thing is just like, what? It's looking at bringing in issues of sexuality, which for my generation was just kind of like, yeah, we were dealing with it here, but in Africa it was just like, let's, so I think I'm learning a lot from her, and she's much younger than me, so I think her approach to feminism, it definitely, there's a fear of it trying to be labeled, oh, you're trying to be Western. But she's very, very clear, and her and her colleagues are very, very clear. No, we are African, and we have these issues within our own culture, and we have to address them in ways that are new and evolving. So yeah, I'm constantly learning in terms of and reorienting my own feminist perspective based on the work of my sister, and as well as Nanelwa, because I've definitely learned from her. She was in my class last year, and so her ideas and just what she was talking about today, having those different experiences has been really eye-opening. So
I think I'd also add that when I think about my role, I think about it more so there than I do here. So I often think about it a lot when I travel to Tanzania and I'm interacting with my cousins or aunts, and I think about like how are we occupying the space together? What is this exchange, right? Because typically, it's like, oh, you give the gifts, you have that like whole celebration to start, but then what's next? Like, what are we talking about? And with my limited Kiswahili, like we have conversations, I think, and really engaging conversations about just where they are in life and what the struggles are. So I think it's a joint exchange, and it's not just like me pouring into them. Like they definitely pour so much into me and make me rethink what African feminism is and what it looks like in multiple ways. But I think it really does start with being the example going there, because often I also find that people aren't asking them the questions. Like they're just, I don't know, it's like they're seen but not seen, or seen but not heard at the same time. So I think providing the space to have exchanges about what we're both going through, but maybe just in different worlds. And also for them to understand me, because there's kind of that cultural difference. So trying to understand, like, oh, Nene, why is your Swahili kind of funky? Or like, why can't you make those chapati? Like, just trying to like meet them where they are. But me being like, well, why do you always have to be in the kitchen? Like, what is this other male cousin of ours doing? Just like sitting there. Like, can we sit? Like, what's going on? So I think like just starting the conversation and then meeting them where they are.
Yeah, let me respond. I think they have explained it better than me. I can put it better than how they have explained about the role of feminism. On your last question about what should be done to keep the women up there, this is what everybody has been struggling with. 2 months ago, at the initiative of the African Union and UN Women, they convened all those who have been leaders in Africa. They convened all of us in New York. I've never seen so many women in one place who have been former, have been so and so and been so and so. But then with the common mission of ensuring that we cannot continue to be former and have been so and so, that we should establish a network, in which they have formed a network, African Women Leaders Network, to see how they could mobilize themselves, but more important, because women are failing maybe to win this selective post because of resources. So how they can use this network to mobilize resources, and if at all Dr. Msia is running for office, then we all mobilize ourselves, we go. And then with the resources, but also matches, and put pressure, make sure that she's elected. So they have done this, they have started a bit late, because we couldn't get to Liberia, but then they are following up on the next election. In Kenya, they did, not from maybe this network because it was not well established, but the women did. The women activists were in Kenya. Before this crisis, the first election when it was done, it was the first time that you have so many women being elected in Kenya, in the Senate, Parliament. So this is what they want to do. But then, again, I'm sorry to say, we never walk the talk. I hope they will this time. Because whether it's within Tanzania, they have key focal points, so that if there is an election, then what do you need? I've seen now, there's the former president of Malawi, Joyce Banda, when she was going back to Malawi, then there was a president declaration that she would be arrested on arrival. And because she had gone via Johannesburg, luckily, she had not left the hotel to take a flight to Malawi. But knowing, of course, our leaders, she could have been arrested for nothing. So then the women from here, because she was here at Wilson Center, they mobilized themselves to get all the legal assistance that she can get. But of course, it didn't work. But at least what they did was able to mobilize resources to fly her out back to the US so that she can continue with their scholarly work. So this is the solidarity. And at this meeting, one of the ladies was saying that we need another 3 C's. We need the networks, of course, they call community. We need connection. We need communication. And with your tweets and the social media, everybody was told, they say, you can't win if you're not in social media. So get to social media to be able to mobilize the women and the other voters. So this is where we are. We are hoping that the dominoes won't continue to fall with these strategies in place.
Thank you. So I'm going to take 2 more questions and then we'll round out. I think I had a hand down here. No? Okay, the lady in the back. And then a gentleman over here.
Okay, so my first question was for the entire board. I wanted to know what are some of the key and distinct differences between African feminism and African womanism, because in my Black Women in America class, we just learned about the different types of feminism and how each sphere is actually different. And so African feminism and African womanism, I know that they're different ideologies, so I just want to know what were some of the distinctive differences. And then also for Manoa, you talked about the difficult, the gap between identifying the daughter as a woman, and I just want to know why you think that is so hard for people to separate those ages and those spheres that you're in if you're grown to be a woman. So why is that so hard for you to accept, in the culture? So.
Kick off? Humanism.
Yes.
One of the things I did talk about, or briefly mention, is the different strands of African feminism. And I think that there is a good reason why a lot of women, African and African American women, have decided to go towards womanism, because the idea that European women have co-opted the term feminism to such an extent that we can't ever separate ourselves from that. And so any type of feminism, Black or African feminism, is still going to be tied to a Eurocentric feminism. And so then we need something different. And so there have been others, African women that have, so you have African womanism, you have motherism, Stewanism. There's I think I'm missing maybe a couple. There were African women have said, okay, we're going to coin this different term, but at the root of it, it's the basic is dealing with gender inequality, challenging patriarchy, challenging attempts to control women's bodies, women's movements. So they're fighting for, in essence, the same things. There are some, I think motherism focuses more on kind of the central role of the mother, status of women as mothers, where you might have other African feminists who, feel like that's not, that who may not agree with such a heavy emphasis on motherhood. But I think with African feminism and African womanism, the core of it, the foundation of it is very much the same. It's just the idea that feminism is too attached to European, feminism,
And so to respond to your question about Binti versus Mwanamke, I think that it was challenging, I think, in Tanzania for people to accept my rejection of Binti, because there's this power dynamic that exists with words. I mean, just like here, there's just power in the words. And I think Binti, while it really is an endearing term, and it's meant to kind of bring you into this like family type of environment, I think the ways that it was used towards me, it felt really condescending, and it felt like I just have to put you in your place. Like, reminder that even though you have this Western experience, like you are here in Tanzania, where gender dynamics are very different. So just remember where you are. So I feel like it was like that confronting power dynamics. And I think that also this idea of mwanamke, like it's not just woman, it's like a concept, right? So mwanamke to me also is primarily used for women who are married or have established family, or connected to a larger entity of familyhood, and have kids and just have something outside of themselves. And I think it's rare to just be a mwanamke by yourself. Like, you can't just be a mwanamke. Like, it has to be associated with something. And so I think that also is like you can't call yourself that, because who are you? Like, you're nobody's wife. Like, you don't have kids. Like, what are you doing? You just look like a student. So I think that's the piece that was challenging for people and challenging for me in that conversation.
Let me just say one thing, because there's another term, mtoto watoto, which means child or children, and it sometimes is used to refer to women. And so, like, at the first time I heard it, I was hanging out with some guy friends in Dar, and another guy came up and said, "VP watoto," and I was like, I don't see the kids. Like, who is he talking to? And so I'm like, well, who? He was talking to us. What's up with the girls? And I'm like, watoto is children. So that's another. I've had debates with a lot of my brothers in Tanzania about that term. But it's also a.
Pardon? I was going to say another word in Swahili that wife is mke, right?
Yes. Right.
Woman is, the word wife is in woman.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's true.
Exactly.
No, I'm sorry. In fact, what Msia just said about mtoto. I mean, if somebody, in Tanzania, colloquial, if they say mtoto, it's about beauty. I mean, if you are a woman, that's why you have a friend, you have a mom, vipi mtoto. Meaning, I mean, showing kind of affection, affection. But if you don't know the culture, then you feel like, oh my God, why did they call me a child? But also the concept of binti, because they use it, I think, as she felt. It's just about the kid. You are still a kid. Yeah, what do you know? Why are you running for office? You are binti. Why are you kid? Why are you? So it's very demeaning in a way. But also, I mean, if it is in terms of relationship, parents and what, it's fine. But then this has not been used to be able to not to get them, these people voted. They said, we've been to Tatueleza Nini. What will you tell us? I mean, what do you know? Yeah, so that's how she felt, but that's how sometimes it is used against the young one when they want to run for leadership.
So in the interest of time, we can continue the conversation after the session is over. I'm going to take my last question, and it's from the gentleman over here.
So Africa is a continent that has a lot of history, a lot of culture and tradition, shaped by thousands of years of history. So do you think these traditions and culture kind of pose a barrier for women to come out? And if so, how do you think they can fix it as Africans? Do you suggest we abandon this culture and tradition, or what do you suggest?
Okay. Yeah, let me answer to that. Maybe when I was speaking, you were not here. But one thing we identified by our culture in Africa, be from many, many years back, but also being influenced by other cultures. But then the aspects of our culture that you cannot abandon. What we are abandoning is that when you have a girl child refuse to go to school because culturally they were not supposed to go to school. So now the movement is to make the girl child go to school. And we all know, and that's why you are all here, without education, you have no space. You cannot have, I mean, whether it's employment, it defines where you'll be as a member of the society. So that's the kind of the culture that we have to give away, to do away with. But then there are certain cultures, as I was saying, like we respect our elders, the way we conduct ourselves, the identity. So there are certain values that are still very, very important, and they go way back. But then there are others that are, I mean, if they are exploitative, that continue, I mean, make the very dominant, continue the patriarchal kind of culture. Those are the things we are trying to do away with.
I just wanted to briefly say some of the conditions that women in Africa find themselves in are directly tied to colonialism. So when you look at like property ownership and how property is kind of, transferred through men, and the idea that kind of pre-colonially you were entitled to land based on your membership in a group, in an ethnic group. So land, you couldn't buy and sell your birthright. And so when that became introduced, but also the idea that, women are supposed to stay in the home, and women who are staying in the home, therefore they're not making money, and the person who's making the actual cash is the one who has the power. That also is a very Eurocentric, concept. So if we look at the conditions under which European women lived in Europe in the 1800s, early 1900s, we see similar structures that were kind of imported into Africa. And because some of our brothers, benefited from that, it was like, well, this is great. I don't want to change this. This is African. And so I think that's also a problem, getting back to kind of, dealing with the fact that some of this isn't our culture. So.
Just last comment. I think just to round out what you have both shared, I think it's equally as important as members of the diaspora, which we all are a part of, that we reshape that narrative, because I think that this is such a critical time for Africa and for us, irrespective of where you are in the world, as Black people, to really be at the forefront of that change, of that narrative. So I think it's really important to think about where you fall and think about the little steps that you can take in the communities that you're a part of.
right, so, yes, so.
Okay, sorry. Don't want to prolong this anymore. But I'm really interested in this issue of language and the way in which certain structures within the linguistic logic and practices of societies perpetuate some of these sort of enduring notions about women and men and gender and so on and so forth. You know. And Msia, you were talking about the term mtoto, referring to, but you know, in Gambia, and I'm sure my brother here would probably understand what I'm saying. There's this term which is gor, which means a man, and the term gorgorlu is used as a verb to capture the ethos of struggling, of strength. I mean, everything that is positive is really associated with this notion of gorgor. And one of the paradoxes is that you find this being used mostly by women. That, you know, in order to do things good, in order to do things, you know, the right way, change things and so on and so forth, you have to gorgor. You know, so there's some kind of an attention being drawn to this aspect of language to maybe begin to fundamentally change these understandings, you know, of these traditional gender roles and perceptions, which are really very deeply embedded in the linguistic structures, which affect, you know, our perceptions and our logics. So I don't know if in Tanzania, also in Kiswahili in particular, you have these sort of paradoxes. You know, just an observation.
Yeah. In fact, I like the observation because I was not attempting to answer a question, because it's an observation. We have, for Tanzania, I must say we are blessed that we have a language that cuts across all our tribal languages. And each one can communicate. And I see some Tanzanians here, I never ask which part of Tanzania they're from, because we have just one language. But then as any other language, the language is always developed. New vocabularies to fit the situation. For example, I've been here at George Washington for now almost 10 months. If I go back, I'll find a new vocabulary in which I don't even understand. Sometimes I feel like it's offending. You say, oh, no. Ambassador, don't worry, this means this and this. So this is how every time, and especially the Tanzanians are very good in coming up with vocabulary terms that fits the times. So this is, I don't know whether it's a paradox, but at times you get lost. What does this mean? Just as you was talking mtoto for somebody who has grown Tanzania, if you tell to somebody who's another, it is like, oh, it's admiration.
I just wanted to say a couple closing things, and so thank you for coming. I know Josephine is going to close it out, but we have an event coming up on November 2nd, and it's going to be looking at surface learning in Ghana. So we have starting last year, ASB Ghana, Alternative Spring Break Ghana. And so we're going to be talking to some of the students and the faculty member who organized that trip. And Kiana, can you raise your hand? She's back there. She went on a trip last spring, so she's going to be one of the students discussing it. So I hope folks come out if you're interested in doing the study abroad program in Ghana. That would be great. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to some of the women who are in the U.S., Tanzanian women who are organizing. And so just here in D.C., you have an organization called Tano Ladies, and they do a lot of organizing in the community. And then you have an NGO called Helping Underserved Communities. And the head of that, the chair of that, is a woman named Zawadi Sakapala. Zawadi, could you just stand up for a second? I just want people to acknowledge you. She's one of the hardest working people I know. She helped start this organization, put her own money into it, raising money to send books to Tanzania, to give scholarships. The first couple years, I think it was pretty much all her funds. So she's always kind of, made me feel bad for not doing more. And then we also have the Diaspora Council of Tanzanians in America, Dakota, which is the largest Tanzanian group in the U.S. But it's an organization where women play a lot of key leadership roles. So I've gone to some of their events and been really impressed with the way that the Tanzanian women in the organization have kind of stepped up and taken really strong leadership positions and roles, and kind of not been allowed people to tell them what to do, but have kind of, taken directive positions. So I just wanted to mention those things, and I'll give it back to Josephine. Thank you.
All right, so once again, on behalf of the Center for African Studies, the Department of African Studies, and the Women Gender Studies Collective, I would like to thank all of you for coming out. It's been a wonderful evening, and we can continue this conversation. And I would like you all to help me to thank our panelists. And from the little Swahili I know, which are 2 words, one of the words I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to say thank you. What do we say?
Asante.
So if you could all give me give them a rousing Asante. Another one. Asante. And the last one. Asante. So thank you all very much. So I'd like to close off with a few quick remarks. One, that after this session is over, please stay and talk and make connections. Dr. Clark talked about quite a number of groups that you might want to talk to her about, getting involved somehow. So keep the conversation alive. I would also like to give quick take-homes. That we've talked a lot, and there's still a lot more to talk about. So how do we continue this conversation? Here at Howard University, thanks to the Center for African Studies, which is based in the Department of African Studies, we've been able to create a collective, which is called the Women and Gender Studies Collective at Howard University. And you can join our, follow us on Twitter. And we're going to be rolling out emails across campus to get students involved. And one thing we're looking at doing, starting next semester, is something we are provisionally calling the Gender Dialogues. It's going to be kind of a town hall where we come and talk about gender issues across the diaspora in Africa. So get involved. We are looking for student interns. And so you can devote a few hours to helping us work to get this together, get it going, and what you get out of that. If you work very well, you get a great recommendation letter, right? So more information coming out. Lastly, I would like to say this, that talking about gender, women's issues, leadership, culture, you name it, start early. Now, if my colleague wouldn't mind, Dr. Anita Plummer is an assistant professor in the Department of African Studies, and she brought her baby. Right, baby Sophia is here to learn about gender issues. That's so great. And it's not too late, it's never too late. So even if we just started now, she is the cutest. She's so weak. She is so alert. It's never too late. So whatever stage you are, even we as professors, ambassadors, diplomats are still in the process of learning. As the ambassador said, culture, gender, all these issues are dynamic. They change on a daily basis, language, and so there's always room for us to learn. Another take home. Go to Tanzania. That's very true. Very true. I call myself a Pan-Africanist, so Tanzania is my next base that I'm going to go to. I'm from Ghana, so of course go to Ghana. Or something plug, and of course go to Malawi as well. So go to Tanzania, and from the Nelwa's experience, learn about the culture, about your people, and see how you can engage. Also remember that you should be open to exploring. You might not be able to go to Tanzania, Ghana, Gambia, Cameroon, but that there's so much resource, or there are so many resources here on campus, Howard University, that you can learn about African issues, gender issues. I would also end up saying that when we talk about African feminism or womanism, I like to say African feminisms. right? Because there are all these different strands which Dr. Clark talked about, and we have to continually explore. Lastly, I also take issue when people say empowering women or empowering African women or black women. We don't need to be empowered. We are already empowered. So my next research article, which is going to come out, and which I'm hoping will come up in the New York Times, is my challenge that says African women don't need empowering. We need re-empowering. Because traditionally, we have been empowered. We are empowered. We need to re-empower ourselves in different ways based on circumstances and how the world is changing. So to all my African women and our supporting African men, join the train to Tanzania, Gambia, Ghana, Senegal, you name it, and let's go together, re-empowering ourselves and the black woman wherever she is located.